Okay, I'll go first. Hi, my name is Shelmina Abji. And first of all, I want to thank you and the rest of the Girl Up team for doing what you're doing. You're such an inspiration for all young women watching you globally. So thank you for doing this. What inspired me to write this book and the work that I do? It's a long story, but I'm going to make it really short. What I want to do is I want to create gender equality in leadership roles, very, very specifically leadership roles, because women, young women like you, are attending incredible institutions, getting great grades in universities, and even getting advanced degrees, masters, PhDs, etc. However, at the first level of promotion in corporate America, for every 100 men that get promoted, 66 women get promoted. And that problem gets compounded at each additional level. And when you get to the top, depending on what statistics and how you slice and dice the data, there's less than 20% women. And if you're a woman of color like I am, it's less than 5%. And this is not right because we did not become stupid overnight. What happens is a lot of what worked for us in college to get good grades and to study well does not work in corporate America. I came from humble beginnings in Tanzania, first generation college graduate with a bachelor's degree in computer science from a very small university. And I was completely lost when I entered corporate America. I had to learn so much. What does it take to become successful in corporate America? It took me 10 years to get my first promotion. But as soon as I sat on the other side of the table, I got promoted every 2 years because I understood how you advance and scale up the corporate ladder. And I want to teach that to every woman I possibly can globally. So young women like you, if you understand the strategies and intentionally execute those strategies as you enter the workforce, we will become the change we want to see. And we will together create gender and racial equality in leadership roles.
Okay, so I'll go next then. My name is Bilge Erten, and again, I'd like to also thank all the organizers and Ilinka in particular for putting together this really amazing, inspirational, but also I think an event that provides perspective to young women around the world. So I'm a professor of economics and international affairs at Northeastern University. Basically my research is generally on violence against women and also sexual harassment against girls in developing country contexts. And I do also some work related to mental health and its basically policies that affect mental health and how that has spillovers on economic inequalities. And I'm associate editor in Feminist Economics. Also, I'm a co-editor in the Review of Economics of the Household. So I did my undergraduate studies in Turkey, and I was inspired by several of my professors during my undergraduate studies, and mostly the professors who made connections with real-world issues. And this was mostly in my courses in development economics, economic history, and also gender in the world economy courses. And basically, I thought this is, academia is an area where I can make the most difference in my life. And that's why I went for a PhD in economics at UMass Amherst. And then later I did a postdoc at Columbia University. And I've been at Northeastern for the past 9 years. And in terms of how I spend my days, I think that was a question. So I spent my days mostly focusing on my research. This semester and next semester, I'll be teaching some courses in development economics at Northeastern. So most of my research is in developing countries, but recently I've done also some research related to effects of COVID-19 on domestic violence in the US. And I have some ongoing sort of very preliminary research ideas about how policing affects domestic violence in the US context as well. So looking forward to discuss. I think also we don't go to the other questions, right? Just the introduction, I think at this point. I think I'm good.
Good afternoon, divine ones. My name is Bridget. Sorry, I have a little cough. Ilinka and Tahani and all of the team, thank you so much for allowing me to be of service. What inspired me, a little bit about myself. Right now, I work at one of the spaces that I work in is the YW Boston. As a relationship manager. And what I do is I help facilitate conversations with organizations around organizational change and helping them reimagine more inclusive and equitable workspaces. And alongside that, I still work with One Race Inc. in Salem, which is rooting action to cultivate equality Inc. and works with also high schoolers and sometimes professionals in the industry to help them unpack some of the ways in which the systems of supremacy have convinced them, and whether they're in high school or whether they are adults, they have convinced them around the myth of, that we are a race other than human. And what inspired me to do this work, and I love that, there are some high schoolers here, because they're helping me recognize where I've come from. I've always been doing equity work, because I remember in high school, I used to be a part of the civil rights team, the student problem identification and resolution of issues together console. When I saw injustice, I couldn't be quiet. And then, of course, I also do equity and advocacy work on a community level in my community here in Malden. And I would like to think that after doing some work with also like my astrologist and just looking at this is work that I was meant to do. So it helps me know that I'm in alignment, and it also pushes me to continuously want to do more. And more right now looks like looking at how these systems that I'm talking to other people about have been showing up in my body, and how I'm participating in the same systems just because I know what injustice is and how it harms trans women and, Black-bodied women and all types of women and types of families and types of immigrants, people all over the world. It doesn't mean that I'm practicing it. So right now, my work has also been looking at how I can practice more deeply what I'm preaching. And a day in my life usually involves like conversations like that with my coworkers. If on a good day, I meditate and I center myself, and I talk to coworkers, I facilitate dialogues, and then I go in spaces where I can unpack some of my embodied inequities. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you all so much for such insightful responses and really just detailing your personal experiences as well. As college students and high school students in general, it's very inspiring to see people in your positions who are fighting in various aspects of economic justice, from women's empowerment to civil rights and social justice and mental health and domestic violence. So it's so nice to see all these very different but still connected aspects of economic justice that you guys are fighting towards for equity. So I guess we can move on to another general question that I will actually direct towards Dr. Erten. So this question is, what is your vision for an economically just world? And how does that play out for individuals? And what impacts would that have on women's rights as well as global economies?
Yep, great question. Thank you. So economic justice, I think, as a broad goal, we can consider as the pursuit of policies, practices, and cultural changes that would aim to rectify and overcome the economic barriers that women and minorities in particular face in any economy. And there are several factors, of course, that can impact women's economic potential. And if we look at, for example, some of the work by Claudia Golden, who was, as you know, a recent Nobel laureate from Harvard, and for her work on gender, actually. And a lot of people, 20 years ago, apparently, didn't even think someone working on gender inequality would even get such an award, right? Because they have been even much more male back then. And in her work, I mean, if you look at her book, Claudia Golden basically has been discussing, why do we have, for example, wage barriers, wage disparities in the US, and what explains this? And one of her, I think, core arguments is that we have greedy jobs. And by greedy, what does that mean, really? That's not necessarily economics term, right? And it actually refers to the idea that there are these jobs that require work during time, let's say after 5 p.m., when women with children might want to be with their children at a specific time period, or that might require one to be on call, right? So that means, you're a manager and then they can call you anytime in the weekend. So these types of jobs, the greedy jobs, they come with the pay compensation. And basically women, because they have family responsibilities, oftentimes, they are unwilling to take up such positions, right? They're not as flexible, right? And in those contexts, basically being more flexible comes with a more added premium. And that is actually one of the biggest drivers of seeing these gender pay gaps, even within the same occupation, within the same firm, right? And that's because, even if you do the same job, you have the same skill set, same education, as Shelmina was referring earlier, women have faced these barriers of being promotion because partly they cannot be as flexible. And why is that? Because we have gender norms that basically prescribe certain roles to women and not as much to men. And so that's a very important part of gender inequality. And in economics, we consider gender norms, right? So more broadly, what are the typical roles that women are willing to pay, and that comes with care responsibilities, caring for children, caring for elderly, doing other household work activities, right? All of these put additional burden to women's time and constrains their career opportunities. Another very important factor that can prevent women's economic potential is gender discrimination and stereotypes, right? So these are, for example, what society thinks women's, roles can be, but also, for example, in hiring practices, you can have discrimination, in promotion, in wage disparities, but also, in education, for example, in developing countries, we still have huge disparities in tertiary education in terms of girls' education. Like a lot of girls just don't even go to college in developing countries, right? So they don't even get the same skill set. In the US, you have the same opposite in the sense that now girls go to college more than boys. But as Shelmina said, we have this glass ceiling effect that partly to discriminatory promotional practices, and partly because women internalize the gender norms and they are not willing to kind of step up for the types of greedy jobs that have higher rewards, basically. And it's very difficult because you cannot just, say, okay, I'm going to just create an equal pay, equal wage type law, and it's going to completely get rid of that inequality. It actually really doesn't work that way. But we know from economics research that transparency, for example, is really important. For example, there's research recently, a few months ago, came up that says in Canada, when they make transparent for public wages, what is paid in the public servants, what is shown is that the transparency actually eliminates a lot of the gender pay gaps. So when people realize and see, oh, look, these women, they do the same work, they're getting paid less, and it is public information and it's by public, providers. So that can be something, done with. So they basically correct for that over time. But for private firms, that's much, much harder. and also for the things that I just talked about related to flexibility, right? That actually, and also we know in economics, for example, that there is a motherhood penalty. As soon as you become a mother, you actually face an earnings gap, like your earnings literally decline after becoming a mother. And that's even after you come back to the workforce. Still, you see these effects, and you see these effects even in countries that have, dads. So, for example, parenthood, parent time off for the fathers. Even in those countries, even in Sweden, you see that mothers suffer from this kind of penalty. So it's not that easy. Let's just like fix the policies and we will get rid of this. You will not get rid of it until all the gender norms in the household kind of create a much more flexible environment, and also the firms, think about these issues, right? For example, do you really need these greedy jobs in the economy? Can't you get work done even, in a more with jobs that are provide more flexibility overall? So both things actually need to adjust. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really appreciate your discussion about the contention kind of between like flexibility and then also just like the potential for women to enter, like you said, in the workforce, or just to pursue things that they want to pursue in education. So it really goes to show how just structural and systemic issues like that is really an issue that is limiting opportunities in the economic sphere. So for our next question, I'll direct this question for Bridget. So what are common misconceptions people have about policies for combating income inequality and supporting women and people of color in the workplace? Also, how can we combat these assumptions?
I think some of the common misconceptions usually involve that this work is easy and that it's a checkbox. And I also was one of those people that when I was doing it, sometimes when I hear people like, oh, it's so hard. Yes, because supremacy auto updates and it doesn't, it doesn't stop. And when we think about especially like the Roe v. Wade or some of the laws that have been overturned, those were things that we thought were done, but then like people that were interested in rolling back those progressive rules found a new way. So my work usually comes around like helping people understand that it's not a journey it's not a destination. It's not a destination. It is a continuous journey, and it's painful because it involves looking at and battling and contending with how inequity, especially economic inequity, shows up in all sides of our shaping, whether it's at the family level, at the school level, at the community level, at the historical level, at the ancestral level. And Dr. Erten spoke a little bit to that, and so did Shelmina. Like, it's continuous work. And the other misconception is around the assumption that it's an external thing and not also internal work. And one of the things that my experience has shown me is that as much as I love speaking truth to power, sometimes that power that I have to speak truth to is my egoic mind that tells me that other people need fixing and not me, that other people need work. And if I fix the external, then these systems that are woven in my bones will go away. So that is something that that comes to mind. And how can we more equitably support people of color in the workplaces? Looking at how economic inequity shows up at all sides of their identities, because women are also immigrant. Women also have abilities. Women also have religions. Women also have age. Women also have, gender identities that are, sexual orientations that at all different sides, because of how supremacy replicates itself. Those are the things that interrupt economic equality and require us to sit down and converse with each other in terms of like, how has supremacy impacted me, that when I look at you and I am advocating for your justice and your liberation, there's certain parts of your identity that I'm not taking into account. And I have to regain my sight and my hearing and my feelings, so that when you express those things, I can hear you and be a co-conspirator. And because I recognize that you are me and I am you, and our liberation is tied together. Yes. So those are the things that I like to press upon people, and know that it's a journey of. And as long as we are talking about equality at all of these different intersections and different sites, then what we're doing would make sense and be inclusive and equitable for everyone.
So many powerful concepts that you really brought up, and it really ties into the whole idea that you were saying about how a lot of like issues are just intersectional. And how just supremacy and injustice, like you mentioned, beautifully replicates itself, and creates, and you have to take into account the historical context of such things and the cultural context of such things, and how that not only influences the external treatment and perception of yourself, but also the internal as well, and the implications it has on how you view yourself and how you promote, or how you present yourself to the world. So very, very profound statements. Thank you very much. And the last general question, I will toss this to Shelmina. So this question is, how can women emerge as leaders in the workplace? And what can we do to ensure that we're being respected and to support each other in male-dominated work environments?
Thank you. This is my life's work, Elise. This is what I do day in and day out, is to teach women how to emerge as leaders at work. I loved the perspectives of Dr. Erten and Bridget. We have all these headwinds, and so I am teaching women how to convert those headwinds into tailwinds and look at every challenge as an opportunity to learn and to grow. So advance into leadership roles. When we are present in every room where decisions are made, that's how we are going to dismantle these whatever systems have been in place without our input. And so for me, it is really, really critical that we shoot for the stars and land on the moon, and that we opt into the leadership pipeline. And I am showing you exactly how to do that. My book goes into what you can do. What I will tell you is, I talked about how I started from humble beginnings in Tanzania, but I also rose up to become one of the highest ranking women of color at IBM, running global businesses in excess of $1 billion in annual revenue, and hiring and promoting hundreds of professionals. So I have been responsible for promoting. I have been in the rooms where these decisions are being made. How do women get promoted? And I'm teaching women how to do that because I had to learn how to do that. What people say about you when you're not in the room, your personal brand matters. Your career trajectory is determined in a room where you're not present. And many of us women don't realize that. We show up to work, we don't recognize or realize the impressions we are leaving behind, which is forming our personal brand. When we show up to work overwhelmed, no one's going to give us more responsibilities because they feel we're already overwhelmed at current levels of responsibility. And with women, we are wired to say yes to everything. So we are wired that we must be liked by everyone. And what I teach women, and my first line sales leader at IBM had told me, Shelmina, we did not hire you to win a popularity contest. We hired you to achieve business outcomes. Aspire to be respected, not to be liked. And so you earn that respect by the way you show up, by the way you respond to situations, especially the negative situations. How you respond to them, how you show up, the value that you create, especially your unique value that makes you essential to the success of your organization. When you show up to do that, you become hard to replace. You get the visibility. You build a brand of someone that is creating you, that is making their organization successful. You start building relationships and you start earning mentors and sponsors because they see potential in you. And so, yes, while there are so many internal and external barriers, there are a lot of internal barriers because when we don't see leaders that look like us, we start underestimating our own capabilities. We start underestimating our own worth. And when we do that, our mind, there are all these voices that make us fearful. These are internal barriers. There are also external barriers. Dr. Erten, Bridget talked about it, but there are also negative stereotypes, microaggressions at work. There are all these external barriers coming at you, but you own the power how to respond to those barriers. And I teach you in this book how to use what I call your power quotient to scan your mental chatter. And if you are fearful or if you're allowing someone else to dictate your behavior, you can stop, scan that, and choose an empowering response that will keep moving you forward, that will keep enabling you to rise up the corporate ladder. Because when we rise up the corporate ladder, and we will make sure there is no gender gap issue. We will make sure that the white supremacy or whatever was going on is not continuing, as Bridget said, on autopilot, replicating. We can actually make decisions that will ensure that women are getting right access to opportunities, women are allowed to contribute value at their maximum capacity, and that we will hire them, we will mentor them, we will retain them, and we will make sure that they're moving up the corporate ladder. That's how powerful we can become. But first, we have to become the change we want to see. And that's why I'm teaching women how to emerge as leaders at work.
Such a beautiful response. And honestly, another just shout out to your book as well. If you haven't read it, it's an amazing, amazing book. And I think you really encapsulated pretty much everything just so beautifully, and how we as women really hone the power to shape like our narrative and shape our life story, despite the external issues that we have to and the hurdles we have to face, really. And I really like how you mentioned how you have to aspire to be respected, not liked, rather respected as a human being, and for the work that you do and what you represent. Just knowing your unique worth and what makes you essential, like you mentioned, it makes you you and not replaceable. So thank you so much. This has been beautiful and just such powerful responses from all of you guys. So now I'm going to pass it on to Tahani, who will go into more individualized and specialized questions for all of our panelists.
Thank you so much, Elise, and thank you again to all our panelists. I'm really excited to ask you these more personalized questions that are geared towards the kinds of work that you do and your areas of expertise. So we're going to go in a round. My first question is going to be geared towards Bridget. And my question is, could you speak to the benefits and impacts that focusing on DEI in the corporate space has on both companies and workers? What are examples of some DEI policies that are genuinely impactful for empowering women in the workplace?
Yes. Thank you for all of the delicious questions. I can't really speak to the benefits and impact of focusing on DEI in corporate spaces without speaking to some of the impacts of the absence of it. And I think an example that all of us understand has to be the pandemic and all of the mess that was happening. I'm so sorry. I like to curse. So I'm trying to like speak without cursing because I'm a lady. But during the pandemic, I think when all of us were forced to pause and we were struggling in the same way, it was very difficult to continue asking people to perform and show up without tending to their humanity. And with all of some of the things that were happening in juxtaposition to each other, whether it was all of the uprisings around George Floyd and all of the beautiful, fathers and mothers and sisters that were lost, or it was anti-Asian racism, and or it was mothers stuck at the border, whether it was in Haiti or Central Americans, or all of the things, whether it was Syrians, a lot of things were happening in juxtaposition to each other, and they were showing up in our bodies. And we had to treat people as humans first. And what, in my experience, that required like tending to the depression and the chronic stress and the anxiety and self-doubt or frustration or isolations that show up. And this is just not the pandemic, but these are things that an absence of rate or an absence of DEI, of conversations around the human and their identities and how inclusivity and equity looks like for their bodies. These are things that do happen on a daily basis, and they continue to happen, but during the pandemic, they were exacerbated. And according to a survey that I usually like to point out, is like, when it comes to identity around gender and all of the other things, a lot of people end up leaving their jobs because of issues of inequity and or microaggressions or things or things around like, I work very hard, as Dr. Shelmina talked about, but I'm being passed up. And when we have issues like that, turnover happens at least twice, much more often in most jobs. Whether it's, and then of course, like when it comes to women and becoming mothers, a lot of them end up being forced out of the workspace, and that is genius that all of us lose out on, because we heard about the parental tax or the mother tax that happens when women have children, and then because millennials. Speaking of millennials, we're 3 times more likely to quit jobs. If we're for millennials of color, they're more likely to quit their jobs than their counterparts. And that turnover costs companies at least $30.5 billion per year. So when you're talking about like how this benefits them, that is money that they don't have to lose. Investing in inclusivity it generates at least 30% higher revenue per employee. And in the top quartile for gender diversity, 21% more people, according to a research by McKinsey, Pew and Kapoor, 21% are more likely to outperform those than the bottom quartile. And there's so many other benefits that happen when people invest in these things. And one of the most important thing that I've discovered from a human to human perspective has been hearing a conversation where people are, again, going back to the realization of how am I you and how are you me, when employees that at different corporations that I'm facilitating with have those conversations with each other, and like, oh, I was able to talk to a colleague about race or gender, and for the first time they heard me. That's trust. That's relationship that would not exist without DEI, in an investment in DEI. When I'm able to work with a client and they're, a Black male, and they say, I didn't know Black women were going through this. I didn't know Indigenous women were suffering or having their babies taken from them or things like that. That is DEI. That's a goal. be high. And that's community and relationship and unlearning that wouldn't happen otherwise.
Thank you so much, Bridget. I think it's so important that you mentioned the many monumental issues that took place post-pandemic and how it's especially important to have DEI in our spaces, in this space and time. And I know being in college, I've seen firsthand the kind of the policies that or the steps colleges take to implement these policies into our spaces and how important it is to go beyond that level as well. So thank you so much for your great insights. I really appreciate it. Moving on to my next question, which is geared towards in your book, Show Your Worth, you highlight a work-life balance as a way to become a leader. Ways that women can maintain this balance, and what are some barriers standing in the way?
Yeah, it's such a great question. You know, we as women, we are never just about our career. And we talked about this. We are mothers, we're sisters, we're friends, we're caregivers, we're volunteers. And I suddenly and unexpectedly became a single mom when my children were 2 and 4, and I was leading a team of 10 and having a target, a quota of delivering $120 million annually. And of course, the first thought is, let me get off my leadership pipeline because I need to take care of my children. However, that was not an option for me. I was the main bread earner, and I needed to work in order to raise my children, which forced me to figure out a way how to thrive both in my work as well as my personal life. And so, you know, I am teaching women how to do that. And first and foremost, and I had a long conversation at Girl Up's convention in July, where I talked about self-care. Because we as women are great at taking care of everyone else, but not of ourselves. But here's the thing, your life is an experience between you and a person or a situation. If you don't show up as your full self, your experience is suboptimized. And so the first thing you must do is to take care of yourself. The second thing is you must realize everyone has 24 hours in a day. Whether it's the CEO of an organization or the president of your school or the person that's entering the workforce, each one of us has 24 hours in a day. When you become strategic and intentional about allocating your most precious asset, which is your attention, to your highest priorities and say no to your lesser priorities, you are structuring your days in a way that you are doing something meaningful at all times. And I teach women how to say no while being kind and firm. Be kind to the person, firm on the decision. So these are things that you must learn. And in order for you to understand your priorities, you also have to understand what's most important to you. How do you define success? And then you set your priorities, and then you allocate your attention to moving closer to your success every day. You see, success does not happen one fine day. Success happens every single day in the way you show up. And so that's what I teach women, to thrive both in their personal and professional lives. And I take you through steps you can take how to achieve that.
Thank you so much, Shelmina. That really spoke to me. Thank you for also sharing the fact that that you are a single mom. That really spoke to me because I have a single mom as well and grew up with a single mother, and she's super awesome. And I too truly believe that women have several dimensions in the roles that they play in people's lives, and it's so important that everyone recognizes this, and not just recognizes it, but truly tries or strives to understand it. So thank you so much. Moving on to my next question, which is geared towards Dr. Erten. So as we all know, you're an associate editor of the Feminist Economics Journal, which provides an open forum for dialogue and debate about feminist economic perspective. What kinds of research are you most excited about, and why do you think a feminist perspective is so important in understanding economics?
Thanks so much. Great discussion. I've been really enjoying everything that has been said. So it's very interesting. A lot of the points that came up, actually, Feminist Economics really tries to publish on those. For example, we publish a lot on care and care economy and how care economy actually underpins the sort of measurable economy that goes into, for example, measurement of GDP, right? So, for example, it's often the case that a lot of care work, it goes unmeasured because there's only time that's spent on it, but then there is no market price. So then it doesn't become, it's unpaid in the sense that women don't get paid for, putting a homemade meal or taking care of children or taking care of the elderly, so many activities. And even self-care, actually, you can consider it as part of the reproduction. Basically, women are key in the whole reproduction of the society. And all of the activities really underpins the economy. And you actually see that when there's a big stretch in women's time and that some of these reproductive activities don't get done. For example, it's one of the important ways this shows up is decline in fertility, right? The more it becomes costlier and costlier to make children in the economy, what we realize is that more and more it can be a joint decision as well. Couples are having fewer children. And this is becoming really important as economies age, right? Because it's an important factor in aging. So now we have a growing population that's getting older and older, and we don't have actually enough people to support these very old population. And I mean, what I mean is that this has real consequences for the economies. And in Feminist Economics, this is a great journal because it's publishing economics research, but always in conversation with other social disciplines. So sociology, anthropology, we publish political science. There's like a lot of interaction of all of these disciplines with economics. And that's why it's really getting a lot more traction than a typical field journal in economics. We tend to have higher citations because we get cited not just by economics, but more broader social science interests. One of the things that I'm really excited about is we are working on a special issue on conflicts, disasters, and violence against women. And I'm one of the guest editors of this special issue. Violence against women, I think I mentioned, so most of my research is on that. And we often think, it can't be a big issue in the US. You'd be surprised, actually, according to 2017 survey of national representative survey on basically domestic violence, but also just sexual violence by non-partners. In the US, basic 37% of women say that they experience physical or sexual or psychological violence from a partner at least one time in their lives. And the annual rate is also really high. Annual rate of 9% of women experience these at least once in a year. So, US rates are actually really alarmingly high. And when you just take out even psychological violence and just consider physical and sexual violence, 22% of women report they experienced this at least once in their lifetimes. So these rates are really high. And they have also mental health and physical health consequences, not just short term, but long term as well. Like people get traumatized and it carries on, leading to huge productivity losses. According to estimates, it's $4 trillion per year of just all of the costs combined, not just on the victims, but also spillover effects to the children. And this has basically generational impacts going over time. So, but for the special issue, we focus mostly on developing countries where domestic violence is even a bigger problem, and just violence against women overall is a bigger problem. And we are looking at in contexts that require emergency situations like natural disasters, conflict situations like armed conflict. There's a lot of armed conflict going on in the world today right now. What happens to violence against women and what types of policies actually can be effective in reducing violence against women and also, children as well. So the special issue, I think, is going to cover many different contexts around the world. So we are working on editing that right now. But in the journals, I think we have another special issue on the LGBT rights and basically trans rights as well. So we have a lot of people working on that. And we had a COVID issue that was had huge citations. So the journal rankings had a jump actually just after that. So, it was extremely impactful. So yeah, read it. I mean, I think in your work, when you're writing a paper, right, it's very easy to it's very accessible language in many of the articles. And that's something actually we encourage authors to do. If there's too much jargon, that's a typical, just someone with a basic training in economics cannot understand. We actually ask the people to rewrite it multiple times until it's really accessible. Yeah, and I think it's a great avenue for putting research, and also just thinking about that. These issues really have to be discussed. I mean, if we are going to make any progress, and women are not minority, right? We are actually more than 50% of the population, right? So this is not just some niche issue, right? These are very important issues that have been neglected for many decades, and I think people like Shelmina, people like Bridget, they are now, putting it forefront as an important issue that we need to confront. And how do we make progress, right? We need to fight on it through many different perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Erten. Thank you for expanding on the works of the Feminist Economics Journal and how there are several interactions with other disciplines. And also thank you for all the valuable examples and statistics that you provided. I'm sure it definitely helped me, and I'm sure it helped a lot of our attendees as well. So just before we move on to a quick speed round of questions from our audience, I just wanted to thank all three of you personally. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and providing us with such valuable insights on all the work that you do. Really appreciate it. So I'm just going to open up the space now for some audience questions. We do have a panelist that has to leave, is on a time crunch, so I really appreciate the responses to be a little short, and for the audience to come up with any questions, feel free to raise your hand or type them in the chat. Hi, thank you, Imari. I'm just going to read out the question, and Imari, just let me know if this is geared toward a particular panelist or if it's for anyone. But the question is, it's for everyone, sorry. This was brought up earlier, but I wanted to know, how do we continue to make space for ourselves, even when there are gendered and racial barriers in the workforce? And how can we use these experiences to advocate for future generations of women?
Can I go first because I have to leave in 2 minutes?
Sure.
So first of all, when you enter the workplace, know that there are gender barriers. Be prepared to not let those derail your success. And this is what I'm teaching you in my book. Because when you learn how to control your own internal barriers, the external barriers will not stand a chance. People cannot make you feel inferior without your consent. You can't listen, people will never be exactly the way you want them to be. Situations will never be exactly the way you want them to be, but you can always be exactly the way you want to show up. And when you show up in your full glory and your full power to show your worth, you are inspiring next generation leaders. You are being an example. Instead of being part of the problem, you're being part of the solution, and you're teaching women that you can't let anything stop you. I didn't let anything stop me, and you shouldn't let anything stop you either.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Imari, for your question. We have another question, and this is also geared towards everyone, but maybe Bridget or Dr. Erten can take this. Do you have any recommendations for the younger generation looking to be involved in gender justice, especially in the workplace?
I'll take this, and I feel like it so relates to the question that was asked above, in terms of like, how do we continue to make space for ourselves, even in spaces that are gendered and racist? I think a lot of practitioners of just embodied social justice and somatics and DEI will attest to this. Some of the work has to begin in you. And this is something that usually shows up in workshops, is we talk about how oppression shows up. And from an ideological perspective, what are the ideas around gender and race that you are still embodying? And I want to lean into, and I say this to lean into the fact that some of the times when I've had to really, really fight hard to ask for my worth, it has been women that look like me that have told me, you're being greedy, or you're being materialistic, or you're being all of these things, you're being aggressive. These things that all of us have been taught about women, sometimes when the notes, and they're, oh, actually, I'll ask you to do the work of two people, but only ask you to do, pay you for one person's salary, has been from people that, so for me, I'm one of those people, like, not all skin folk are kinfolk. And I had those experiences taught me that a part of me was still operating under the impression that I needed to have a savior. And I think this speaks to what Shelmina was talking about. Like, no one can ask you, or no one can treat you any less than what you allow them to treat you. But if I'm not looking at how I've internalized those supremacies and how I'm still living within those veils, and because I know gender equity and I know all of the buzzwords, I am awake. So I would say your presence, know that your presence shifts culture. Know that the antidote to all of these things that you're asking is self, and recognizing how society has been conditioned to not hear your voice, especially if your voice is in a body that experiences oppression at multiple sites. And know how you are operating in this oppression. And once you do that, those things that Shelmina was talking about in terms of like standing in your being will start to get in place.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Dr. Erten, if you can give us some final remarks, and please feel free to answer either the first or second audience questions.
Yep, that's great. I think I was gonna just add that, for example, in academia, right, also there are barriers. And for example, within economics, we have only 30% of women economics faculty are women, and it gets even less as the ranks go up. And so within the American Economic Association, we have for the recent period, we have this committee on the status of women in economics. And that's basically female senior economists saying enough is enough, and we're going to mentor young women. So they held like multiple mentoring workshops to basically educate us on similar points that Shelmina was talking about. For example, how to say no, right? How to structure your day, set your priorities, how to network, all of those things that are sort of the hidden curriculum that you don't get taught about in your PhD program. Basically, they gave us like a workshop, and they still continue these events. They're very, very actually helpful. They actually, in fact, randomized it and looked at the impact, and really has an important impact on women's getting tenure. I myself, as a tenured professor, benefited tremendously from these events. And as much as I can give back, I always go. And like when they say, okay, we are going to hold a breakfast for junior women, can you come? I always say yes. And this is the type of institution building, I think, and that Bridget is very much organized in these types of activities, how to support women, minorities, and in economics, we have also underrepresented minority support through some other committees as well. So those are, I think you have to just kind of really increase their impact, right? Because they also select, so you apply and the events also have to select because they cannot get everybody. But my perspective is that they need to be even bigger, right? Like they need to actually, in fact, say yes to everybody who wants to actually come to those events. Just make it online, right? It doesn't need to be in a physical space. I mean, right now, online events, you don't need to set a capacity. You can go, as much as people want to come. So make it like accessible so that people can hear this information, can really actively use this information, because otherwise it's just very, very difficult, right, to make progress. So I think, in many different professional domains, you need basically these women's groups that support each other, mentor each other, and that help kind of understand, like Shelmina said, it took her a while to understand how to get promoted, right? So there's all these hidden rules that people don't know about, and it's just really important to educate each other.
Thank you so much, Dr. Erten. And thank you to both of you, Bridget and Dr. Erten. I know Shelmina had to leave us, but I'm so grateful that you could all be here. And this concludes the panel section for today. So I'm going to hand over the mic to Ilinka. Thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much. So incredibly grateful that you all were able to join. I've learned so much, and I think this genuinely reinforces to me the importance of having these conversations and creating these spaces that are inclusive and also candid, because we've learned so much from you in just this short time that I know I'll really be taking to heart as I look into like how I want to navigate the workforce and stay true to my values and create more inclusive spaces wherever I go. And I know that's the case for everyone who attended. So a warm and grateful thank you to all of you, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here with us. I want to now transition us to the next portion of our event, but before that, we'll take a quick 2-minute break. So feel free to go do whatever it is you need. And the next part of our event, please stick around for, because it is done by our lovely youth leaders who have done so much work to kind of explore lenses of economic justice and injustice that really matter to them and break them down in ways that help further the conversation, especially around educational disparities, around access to capital, around gender norms and barriers in the economy. So I highly encourage all youth attendees to really come back in a couple minutes and then hear from some amazing youth advocates as well. And another thank you to Dr. Erten and Bridget and to Shelmina. We'll be back soon.
Thank you for organizing.
All right, I think we'll start back up again just in the interest of time. Thank you all so much for sticking around for the next half of our event. I'm especially excited for this half. I am really looking forward to passing the mic to the advocacy committee you met earlier, because this event really came out of conversations we were having about how, I know all of us as students are in the process of trying to figure out what it is we want to do. And I know a lot of us are also driven by this desire to help further gender justice in whatever spaces we enter. And that really means having these conversations and trying to figure out how we fit into these spaces, especially knowing those inequities and kind of like mentally preparing for them, but also trying to like really understand them and so that we can dismantle them. So this event came out of that conversation, and it's really amazing to be here and see it come to fruition. And I'm going to pass it off to our youth leaders and hear more about facets of economic justice that really matter to them and kind of continue that conversation. So without further ado, on to a global perspective on economic justice by our advocacy committee. So we'll be covering education, gender roles, and access as our three main themes, with chances for us to all kind of join the conversation and have this discussion throughout. So without further ado, Education as a Barrier to Women's Economic Participation by the incredible Danielle.
Hi, thank you so much. So my name is Danielle. I use she, her pronouns. As I stated earlier, I am studying English education, so I'm super passionate about education in general. For my portion of the presentation, I'll be focusing on education as a barrier to women's economic justice. It is crucial for us to focus on education, as it is the foundation of our lives and of our livelihood. Without it, it is impossible for us to gain the necessary knowledge to empower ourselves, our community, and as well as other people around us. So there are four main barriers to education I want to highlight. First is the sources of funding. So planning financially for college is extremely stressful. Women at 44% are more likely than men at 39% to say not being able to afford college is a major reason they don't have a bachelor's degree. Despite the fact that women are more likely than men to receive grants, on average, women receive lower amounts. In an effort to combat financial barriers for women, scholarships are on the rise to help women enter underrepresented fields such as STEM. Scholarships can provide women the necessary funding in order to achieve their educational and professional goals, but scholarships advertised for women solely are being targeted as possible violations under Title IX. In addition, sport-based scholarships are also more likely to go to men compared to women. These components lead to women being more likely to take out debt. After the landmark case of Dobbs in 2022, in a post-Roe world, there has been a delay in college enrollment or not attending at all due to unwanted pregnancies. The legalization of abortion has a significant impact on women's wages and educational attainment, particularly in Black women. In America, Black women account for 40% of abortions. Without it, there has been a reduction in Black women enrolling and completing college. It is up to colleges, if they wish or have the funding to do so, to ensure that students know about possible resources to prevent and manage pregnancies. A quote I want to quickly highlight is compared to their counterparts with unmet needs, women with greater access to abortion and control over fertility timing choose to make larger investments in human capital. If we are able to plan out our pregnancies, we're also able to properly plan out our education and professional careers. Period poverty, the lack of access to menstruational products, is a serious issue in American schools. Going to school can already be a challenging experience, but having the added stress of menstruation can make it nearly impossible. Nearly 1/4 of U.S. students have struggled to afford period products. Inflation has rapidly increased the prices of pads and tampons, leaving struggling teens unable to afford them. Without the lack of access to free products in schools, students report feeling stressed and that the institution does not value them. They report not wanting to attend school during their period at all. 4 in 5 students report having missed or know someone who has missed class over menstruation, a number that is far too high. Without these crucial products being offered, menstruating students miss out on valuable education time. Poverty overall is another serious issue affecting American schools. Curbing the intergenerational transmission of poverty is especially important for girls and women. In the United States currently, more women than men live in poverty at 56%. The effects of sexism and racism on institutional structures and across society limit the employment and educational opportunities available to women. Research shows that providing girls with an extra year of schooling can increase individual wages by up to 20%, while also lowering birth rates, which can have a profound economic impact. If we are able to widen the access to education, we are also able to boost the economy through women's participation. So the next slide is lack of access in and after higher education, which was super fascinating to research about. So even when women are able to achieve higher education, there are still facets of it being inaccessible. It's important to consider the gender norms affecting academia. In traditional years spent pursuing higher education, women are also expected to pursue marriage, motherhood, and childcare. We have to consider how this affects women's economic and educational participation, viewing it as a possible barrier, with fewer women in academia having children compared to men. Representation of women in academia is also disproportionate compared to men, seen in faculty and executive. Women make up a majority of non-tenure track lecturers and instructors, yet only less than half are on tenure track or fully fledged professors. This tenure track enables one to have secure lifetime employment, instead only receiving minimal contracts in low-level positions under non-tenure. For these women working in colleges, only 35% of women agreed or strongly agreed that they were being paid fairly versus 47% of men. Women are still paid less at every faculty rank and most positions of institutional leadership. Higher education administrators experience around a 20% gender pay gap, with less than half of women holding college president positions. Student debt, a widely debated issue, also affects women heavily. 41% of women undergraduates take out student loans, with 66% of student debts being held by women. Meeting loan obligations under the wage and opportunity gap is challenging, which widens as they continue to age. This makes it almost impossible to pay off large portions of their student debt, especially given the current rise of pricing across America. It takes approximately 2 years longer to pay off as a woman compared to a man. As women attempted to enter the workforce post-college, only 85% of women were working in full-time jobs, compared to 91% of men. It is crucial to end the gender pay gap for women in order to cultivate opportunities and financial empowerment. So the final, I'm going to touch about the economic benefit that we have when we educate girls. So educating girls has a far-reaching economic and social impact for all. They are more likely to increase their personal earning potential and give back to their communities, reducing poverty. These effects also carry from one generation to the next. Educated girls have fewer, healthier, and better educated children. According to the World Bank, 1 year of just secondary education, so in high school, can make a 25% difference in wages for women. Improved literacy can also significantly affect a woman's earnings up to 95%. Educated girls are more likely to participate in formal labor market and earn higher income. Using their knowledge, they are able to compete in the labor world and acquire necessary life skills to navigate the world in their communities. GDP, or gross domestic product, is a measure used to evaluate a country's economic health. It represents the total monetary value of all final goods and services produced. Countries with low women's participation in the workforce can experience 35% GDP growth by closing the gender gap. Inaccessible education systems for women on average cost countries trillions of dollars in lost lifetime productivity and earnings. If we close this gap, it leads to a more comfortable lifestyle, larger tax intakes for the government, and economic growth for women overall. So closing the education gap for women increases job opportunities, workforce participation, and overall productivity. We were able to acknowledge and empower her ambitions and end stigma and help her earn her human right to a safe, just education. So in this interactive portion of the presentation, we're going to discuss what are some of the ways we can reduce educational barriers for women, and we'll sort of have a quick discussion before I hand it on to the next presenters.
I just put the info in the chat, but if you go to menti.com and type in the code 55003239, you should be able to join the conversation and add your own thoughts, and they'll all kind of pop up on the screen. as we wait for responses to trickle in, people are also welcome to say them verbally. And I think that one way to reduce educational barriers for women is also to like have women in faculty or teaching positions who can kind of like inspire young women to enter different fields. I think I wouldn't have really considered economics if I didn't have such an incredible economics professor who really showed me pathways in it that I hadn't even known about. And I know that that's the same case with students and just young women in general across so many fields, like really having those teachers and professors who are there, who are women, and showing you what it means to actually like study these different fields that are inherently full of gender barriers, but you know, are still important for us to break into, can really help. And I think you can't be what you can't see. So it's really, really valuable to have that. Thanks so much for participating, everyone. Danielle, any final takeaways based off of these?
I feel like these are wonderful and insightful response. Thank you guys for listening and participating in this discussion. I would like to hand it over to the next presenters, to Elise and Tahani, whenever they're ready, just so we can be mindful of everyone's time and continue having this wonderful discussion.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Let me just do some little slide switching. Yay, off we go.
So thank you so much, Danielle, for that wonderful section. So now Tahani and I will tackle gender roles and how social gender norms impact women's economic participation and potential. So before we start to discuss how exactly gender roles impact economic justice, we must first define what exactly gender roles are. So according to the UN, gender roles are defined as social and behavioral norms that within a specific culture are widely considered to be socially appropriate for individuals of a specific sex. These often determine differences in the responsibilities and tasks assigned to women, men, girls, and boys within and outside the private sphere of the household.
And to move on to some historical context, many cite the attribution of biological sex differences, male versus female, to the socially constructed binaries of gender, woman versus man, as encouraging the creation of gender roles. And this is the expectation that certain genders are responsible for certain things due to their biological fitness. Moving on to our next slide, which is on the impact on economic justice. We'll first talk about the gender pay gap, and then we will talk about limited career opportunities. In terms of the gender pay gap, we have three sections: wage disparities, occupational segregation, and the lack of negotiation. In terms of wage disparities, traditional gender roles often place women in caregiving and domestic roles, which can lead to wage disparities. Women are more likely to work part-time, take career breaks for caregiving, or be concentrated in lower-paying professions. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2020, women earned 82 cents for every dollar earned by a man. Moving on to occupational segregation. Gender roles also contribute to occupational segregation, where women are more likely to work in fields like nursing, education, and social work, which tend to have lower wages compared to male-dominated fields. And thirdly, we have a lack of negotiation. Women are less likely to negotiate for higher salaries compared to men. This in part can be attributed to societal expectations and traditional gender roles that discourage assertiveness in women. Moving on to our next slide, which focuses on limited career opportunities. Here we'll talk about the glass ceiling, unequal division of household labor, and the maternal wall bias. In terms of the glass ceiling, gender roles have created a social barrier to career advancements for many female professionals that prevents them from achieving upward success in their careers. And then we'll talk about unequal division of household labor. Women often bear a disproportionate burden of domestic and caregiving responsibilities that complicate their balance of work and family life. If you remember, Shelmina touched on this in our panelist section, and she provided some great examples on how women can work towards achieving this work-life balance as well. And thirdly, I am going to talk to you about the maternal wall bias. This bias is the perception that pregnant women and working mothers are less competent and less committed to their jobs, which subsequently increases instances related to discrimination and wage inequities. Women without children are typically offered higher starting salaries than women with children, and women often receive poorer treatment when returning from maternity leave. Studies have shown that mothers, compared to women with identical resumes but no children, were 79% less likely to be hired, 100% less likely to be promoted, offered $11,000 less in terms of salary for the same position, and held to high performance and punctuality standards. These statistics show that it really is a problem, and it's important to recognize this issue when moving forward.
So now on to some of the challenges that women face as a result of societal gender roles. So first, male and female dominated industries are actually direct reflections of traditional gender roles that we can still see today. A lot of quote unquote male dominated fields such as STEM, CS, business, construction, or any type of field that has to do with physical labor or just more like computational labor as well, masculine, which disproportionately encourages men from pursuing those fields. And on the flip side, discourages women from entering those fields. And women who do pursue fields that are more masculine often face discrimination in schooling and on the job. And we also noticed that this bias starts as early as childhood, where educators, parents, toy and even the media create environments where boys' attention is steered more towards STEM, physical activities, and activities that deal with competitiveness. And on the flip side, attention towards domesticity and aesthetics. And these characteristics do largely align with the fields that we perceive as quote unquote masculine and quote unquote feminine, respectively. There are also salient forms of economic injustice within female-dominated careers. And this is exactly what Tahani touched on just previously, and also what Dr. Erten touched on as well. How women in even female-dominated careers tend to have lower salaries than men doing the same work. So this is highly visible in dentistry, specifically with dental hygienists. So women comprise about 93% of dental hygienists in the United States, yet the median salary for women is a little over $114,000, while the median salary for men is about $120,000. So these discrepancies in pay do lead to women having lower lifetime earnings overall and less overall wealth by the time they retire, which shows that economic injustice does perpetuate challenges starting from childhood, lasting all the way to even retirement. It's also very important to look at economic disparities through an intersectional lens. And again, Bridget also touched on this in a lot of her questions that she answered. So we're going to break it down into 3 separate categories. So first we'll do race and ethnicity, then socioeconomic status and class, and then sexuality and gender identity. So starting with race and ethnicity, the gender wage gap does actually vary with race and ethnicity. So for every $1 that a white man makes, Asian women make around 92 cents, Black women make around 67 cents, and Latinx women, Indigenous women both make around 57 cents and even less in some certain circumstances. In addition, the glass ceiling is harder to break for women of color because they not only face the gender barrier, but also the racial barrier as well. And we can see this in statistics that show that white women are around 4.5 times more likely to hold leadership positions and senior level positions than Black and brown women are in the same careers. So going on to socioeconomic status and class, low-income women disproportionately work in more of essential roles or kind of service type work, which are often low wage, insecure, meaning there's low job security, they're undervalued and more vulnerable to health risks. So in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, we definitely saw this, how people who work essential roles are more in contact with COVID-19 and other contagious public health risks. In addition, we see this with hazardous environmental exposures as well in certain industries. These can lead to the development of various health concerns and chronic illnesses, not only for women, but also for their families as well. In addition, low-wage earners typically have limited access to paid parental leave. And this is also further exacerbated by the fact that the US lacks a national and comprehensive paid family leave for all families, women and men included. And lastly, economic outcomes are also influenced by sexuality and gender identity. So first, we see that LGBTQ plus women earn around 79 cents for every dollar that heterosexual men make. And this is about 3 cents less than that of heterosexual women. In addition, anti-LGBTQ plus laws and homophobia create hostile work environments that actually discourage queer women from reporting instances of discrimination, and overall just creating environments where they feel unable to speak up in the face of discrimination and adversity.
Thanks so much, Elise. So moving on, we're going to have a quick discussion question, and it is time to think introspectively, as it says on the slide. If anyone would like to speak up, that would be great, but please feel free to type it in the chat as well. The question is, have you ever seen or experienced an instance of gender equality in your personal life or in the media? So if everyone can type that in, that might be better, just so we could move forward. While you type something, then we'll revisit that question just before we wrap up. But in terms of solutions and strategies to all those issues that we just spoke about, strategies and initiatives that can help dismantle the traditional domestic gender roles. For example, we could have promoting shared household responsibilities. Some of the responsibilities that are in the households today do remain stereotypical. And if we move towards changing that to promote shared responsibilities, we would work towards actively trying to break those stereotypes. And secondly, we could encourage flexible work arrangements and parental leave policies. This is really important, and it is important to note that companies are taking the right steps towards it. For example, having daycares at company offices, pens, places close by. All those are works towards improving and having better work arrangements. And thirdly, providing education and awareness programs. More than anything, it's just so important to understand what domestic gender roles are, or the traditional gender roles, and how do we move forward from breaking those stereotypes into learning more about what it means to have these shared responsibilities and more modern day domestic gender roles today.
Yeah, and these are amazing, amazing solutions that Tahani brings up. In addition, another good solution is also advocating for inclusive and non-discriminatory policies in workplaces and societies. Because when you speak up and say something, that's how change can be affected, because the issue becomes more visible. And with gender inequality and economic injustice, these are visible issues, but they're not as visible as they should be. So really speaking up and bringing them to light can put us in a position and point us in the direction of actually combating and mitigating these issues. In addition, promoting gender equality in education and media to challenge stereotypes, because again, like a lot of our panelists mentioned, how a lot of stereotypes are ingrained. So even though they may be externally placed on you, as women, we tend to internalize those barriers that are placed upon us, even though they may not be applicable to us. So really starting at the very root cause and how we perceive ourselves and how society perceives women, we can also try to mitigate the issues that are perpetuated by that issue and creating even more barriers in the workplace and in society in general. So that wraps up our session, and now I will pass it on to Cece and Juby, who will talk about access to capital.
So for this portion, the last portion of our presentation, we'd like to wrap up a lot of the things that were mentioned earlier in this session by talking specifically about what access to capital is and how that contributes to economic justice, particularly for women in the workplace. So Alinka, I'm not sure if we have the interactive portion in the beginning. Oh, okay. No worries, especially given I think we're pretty short on time. We'll just keep this short. So For the sake of this presentation, we would like to define capital mostly as the financial markets, venture funding, access to banking institutions, such as gaining proper documentation to set up bank accounts and be able to access these capital statements, as well as financial literacy programs to encourage women to be able to gain access and understand these terms and definitions and ways to manage their money in order to excel in the workforce as a lot of other men do. So if we could move on to the next slide. So in terms of venture capital and startups, in the tech and entrepreneurship sector, women continue to face challenges in securing venture capital funding for their startups. And there is a significant gender gaps in this sector, with the majority of investments going to male-led startups. According to data collected by PitchBook in 2020, companies with all-female founding teams received just 2.3% of total venture capital funding produced. And for microfinance and small business loans, another huge portion of access to capital. Global Microscope on Financial Inclusion reported in 2020 that women make up about 58% of microfinance clients worldwide. However, many of these women face challenges in obtaining traditional bank loans for small businesses. And in many countries, especially in developing or underdeveloped regions, female entrepreneurs are less likely to have access to bank loans due to factors such as collateral requirements and gender bias. And for the third one, which we feel constitutes to the barriers in terms of access to capitals, is ownership and control. And some progress has definitely been made in this sector. And a lot of women are slowly gaining more access to these banks or mobile money accounts in terms of being able to control their own money and all of that. However, according to other databases such as the Global Findex, a lot of these has only pertained to more developed nations, and this issue continues to be exacerbated in developing or underdeveloped places. And so if we could move on to the next slide. And then we want to touch upon how access to capital directly builds economies. And so we kind of separated this into 4 main bullet points. And so more broadly, access to capital allows business to expand, invest in new technology, and hire more employees. And studies have shown that when businesses invest in minorities or women, this significantly builds their businesses in terms of the different and diverse skill sets that these members can bring to their companies. And so the first one is economic diversification, as I mentioned, and innovation. And capital is essential for entrepreneurs to develop new ideas, products, and services to compete on a global scale. And oftentimes women can bring this component and diversity to this table, given their unique experiences. And the second point is that capital investment, education, workforce development helps create a skilled and productive labor force, which in turn enhances economic productivity. And so given the large amount of women who are now receiving higher education, oftentimes in greater levels than men, it is really important to leverage what they can bring to the table as well from the skill sets and knowledge that they have to offer. And so the third point is about how it can enable the adoption of advanced technology, which can boost efficiency and productivity across various sectors, which is especially crucial in the modern global economy. And so we need people who are able to adapt, and these people who have demonstrated, women who have demonstrated exceptional excellence in their studies and are able and competent to bring these to the workforce as well. And the last point is that sometimes we understand that this cannot encompass all scenarios, especially because poverty reduction and economic empowerment comes in multiple facets. However, it has proven to these access to financial services and capital, especially for underserved populations, have proven to lead to poverty reduction and economic empowerment. For example, Rwanda, which implemented pro-women reforms after the 1994 genocide, achieved remarkable progress, and now women hold 2/3 of parliamentary seats, and gender rights are are written in their constitution. And so, if we can move on to the next slide. So just to elaborate a little bit more about the role that women play specifically in economy. So a lot of the times women typically invest a high proportion of their earnings in their families and communities than men. And so the effect that this creates is that it underscores the impact that a lot of them can have when they are empowered financially. However, to unlock their full potential, women need access to a full range of credit, banking, and financial services that men receive and these male-led startups have. And so these facilities are essential for developing the assets, managing their land, as well as growing their businesses. And a particular challenge that has been documented for women in the workforce in gaining capital and building their leadership is a lack of mentorship. And the absence of guidance in the workforce can often hinder their progress in these fields, making these mentorship programs and networks crucial to what they can actually create. And so we hope that in advocating for a gender lens approach in development of financial products and services, women will be able to gain greater access to capital as well as unlock their full potential, given the foundation that they already have. And so now I would like to pass on to Juby, who will go in depth on a little case study on access to capital.
Thank you, Cece. So I know we're running short on time, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. But Cece and I wanted to run through a brief case study on women's access to capital in South Korea specifically. So in order to understand the Korean economy, I'll first explain the miracle on the Han River. Essentially, after the Korean War, Korea was one of the world's poorest countries. But from 1950 to today, Korea was able to grow its economy to be the 13th largest in the world. And you can see this economic growth evidenced by the graph to the right. So this rapid, unparalleled economic growth was fueled by increases in worker productivity, export-oriented industrialization, and foreign aid. These strategies, however, led to the creation of chaebols, which are basically large companies that the Korean government gave economic support to in order to boost exports. So these companies, many of which were founded in the 50s and 60s, own over 50% of Korea's goods and services today, and Samsung, LG, and Hyundai are a few examples of chaebol companies that you might know. So the role of women in Korea's economic growth has been quite profound. Women's rights in Korea have shifted and evolved frequently throughout the country's history. Today, both men and women are educated to basically the same degree in Korea, but this equality doesn't translate into workplace success for women. For example, only 10% of Korean executives are female, and Korea also has the widest gender pay gap of any OECD country in the world. Because women take on the brunt of childcare and domestic labor responsibilities, as you can see from the graph, many women drop out of the workforce once they have kids. Overall, this leads to a decrease in capital in the hands of women. Thank you. Women-owned startups, as a result of this workplace climate, have become more and more popular within South Korea. And with this increase has come an increase in venture capital funding for these companies. So as Cece mentioned, venture capital is an industry that basically provides funding to emerging startup companies in hopes that they'll grow and become the next Google, Uber, or Netflix, for example. Nevertheless, there are gender inequities that persist within VC. Most Korean venture capitalists are men, which means that there can sometimes be a limited understanding / openness to women-owned companies, especially those that appeal to female audiences rather than men. Additionally, some of these startups have trouble establishing themselves because of the chaebol companies that I mentioned before, which will oftentimes buy out the small companies and make the market very difficult to compete in. Nevertheless, the Korean government has seemingly recognized the importance of giving women access to capital and consequently gave $470 million to support women-owned companies in 2019. The state-linked Korea Venture Investment Corporation also allocated $25 million towards these companies in hopes that women might bolster new growth within the Korean economy. So in conclusion, South Korea serves as a present progressing example of a country that has pushed forward many efforts towards dismantling gender barriers towards economic justice. It encapsulates the importance of education, which Danielle talked about, and it also demonstrates the role that gender roles and norms play in our society, per what Elise and Tahani had to say. And lastly, Korea is an example of a country that is actively pushing for women to have greater access to capital, especially in the field of venture capital, like Cece and I said. Together, these efforts can help women become more empowered in their economies and their professional lives.
Thank you so much to all of our incredible advocacy committee members for their presentations. I genuinely think it's so cool to hear all these like intersectional and deep and important facets of economic justice and injustice to understand really how women are impacted around the world and have that kind of global perspective. And I can attest to the fact that months of hard work and research and collaboration and Zoom calls and Slack messages went into today. So I just want to give so much appreciation to every single one of our amazing board members who helped make this possible. So before we wrap up, I just want to say that I hope you all stay involved with Girl Up New England, and I hope that the conversations we've begun today can continue and can translate, especially into in-person spaces as we start to come back together in person in the coming months. So if you haven't already, I hope you check out our Instagram or sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about opportunities like this one. We're also launching a fundraiser for sustainable period products for girls in the refugee community in Massachusetts, specifically Afghan and Haitian refugees who are in our communities across the state. And we're pairing that with a day of action for menstrual equity on January 20th. And you're actually the first to hear about this. So that's very, very exciting. And this will be in person at the Cambridge Public Library in Massachusetts. So we hope that this will provide us chances to gather in person and kind of build off of what we've learned, especially kind of seeing how all these issues are connected and how menstrual equity is impacting education, which is impacting economic justice and opportunities. So if you scan the QR code, you'll get access to all these possible ways to stay in touch and get involved, and I really hope you will. And once again, just thank you so much for being here. It means a lot, and this is really how change begins. And thank you so much once again to our incredible organizing team for making this possible. I hope you all have a lovely evening, and I'm so grateful for you all.